Hedorah, toxic invader of another world. Destoroyah, the titanic Precambrian horror. Each of these horrific hive minds bring death upon all unfortunate enough to cross their paths. But if they were to meet, which would ultimately kill the other? To decide which of these two horrific beings would come out on top, I, GrayShot151 of What If Kaiju, am now going to ask, what if Destoroyah fought Hedorah? For this theoretical fight, Hedorah will be scaled to his Millennium counterpart, and I'm primarily looking at just the films and supplemental material like comics and books for how this fight will go down. So with that said, let's dive in. Hedorah, the interplanetary pollution-eating Triphibian, is truly death incarnate for any poor creature unlucky enough to encounter the horror. Even as a juvenile, he inflicted horrendous chemical burns upon unsuspecting victims before eventually growing so large that the very sulfuric mist he used to fly dissolved humans to their bones. But in a kaiju-focused fight, the Walking Plague has plenty of abilities to overwhelm his foes. First off, and its greatest offensive and defensive weapon is its acidic sludge. This can be fired on enemies to burn them from afar, unleashed upon them like a raging river torrent, or used defensively if the enemy combatant attempts to rip and tear the alien's flesh apart. As seen with Godzilla, simply punching into the sludge monster's final form resulted in Godzilla's flesh being stripped to the bone. But for as potent as that may seem, Hedorah's sludge does lose its acidic efficiency as its body mass decreases. A trait that might sound strange until you realize that Hedorah's body is more liquid than solid, as seen when he flew through a building not yet complete in its construction. To strike targets without giving up needed body mass, Hedorah also has the Hedorah Ray, a toxic crimson bolt that it can unleash from its eyes, available in its final and flying form. Speaking of the latter, the flying saucer-shaped protoform allows Hedorah to fly and unleash a constant stream of sulfuric acid mist upon monster and human alike. This mist proved strong enough to incapacitate Godzilla, and other than the King of the Monsters ramming into his aerial form, there wasn't much the Leviathan could do thanks to Hedorah's immunity to radiation. Godzilla's atomic ray was essentially useless. Only with humanity's help could Godzilla overcome Hedorah, using massive electrodes to dehydrate the toxic alien creature. Otherwise, in a straight-up fight, if you can't dehydrate the alien beast, Hedorah is nearly invulnerable, though not invincible. Without using body mass, he cannot regenerate, and when his eye was damaged, it did not immediately heal. Even with those caveats, Hedorah is still an inescapable horror that will only grow stronger until the entire world is consumed. But for another monster which would no doubt seek the eradication of life across the world, look no further than the Precambrian horror that is Destoroyah. Starting off as nothing but a colony of ancient Precambrian life forms, once mutated by the Oxygen Destroyer's energies, the hive mind grew into a perfect 80,000 ton, 120 meter tall perfect life form. First off is the micro-oxygen beam or oxygen destroyer ray, a concentrated blast of the destructive energy unleashed by the oxygen destroyer. The beam easily knocked around Godzilla Jr. and meltdown Godzilla. The micro-oxygen ray also might have burned a hole clean through Godzilla, but you can look to my last video, MonsterX vs. Destoroyah, for why I don't buy that feat and why I really won't be considering it here. The variable slicer, meanwhile, or horn katana as I prefer to call it, is easily the horror's deadliest attack. It cut all the way through Meltdown Godzilla, and the damage done was horrendous, leaving a grisly scar. If not for Meltdown's insane healing factor on account of his surplus of power, the variable slicer probably would have killed him and most monsters that fell victim to the blade. Other potent abilities include being able to absorb the DNA of monsters like Godzilla Jr., which fueled his growth into his final form, drain his opponents of energy through his prehensile pincered tail, or drain his opponents by inserting micro-oxygen molecules into them. He can also split into dozens of aggregates, and once those aggregates join back together, they can form a new final body that is perfectly healed. Also, go check out the stomach beam. It's so cool, but it won't be in this fight, sorry. Destoroyah can also fly and drag Godzilla around with ease, but this doesn't just apply to when he is in the air. He tossed Meltdown Godzilla's 60,000 ton body without any effort, and proved a match for Godzilla's strength, a Godzilla that lifted the 150,000 ton Mechagodzilla with no problem. Now, Destoroyah is susceptible to extreme heat and cold, but even with those weaknesses, he did manage to put up a pretty good fight against Meltdown Godzilla. A Godzilla whose primary attack was the Red Spiral Atomic Ray, an increasingly more powerful version of the beam he used to kill Mechagodzilla and Space Godzilla. Durability-wise, he can take a beating and keep going, which is good because he does lack regeneration. If you're an oxygen-based life form, it's best to stay away from this horrific abomination. Hey everyone, just a real quick break before we get to the final analysis. Just wanted to say, I am noticing a lot of you guys aren't subscribed, and it would really help out the channel if you hit that button. Maybe a like button too if you don't mind. But enough of my requests, let's get back to the analysis. So with each side's strengths, weaknesses, and powers listed, who do I think would actually come out on top if they were to cross paths when they are scaled? In a battlefield that doesn't favor any side, so no easy access to water for Hedorah, for instance, I think it's easier to describe how their powers really wouldn't affect one another. Hedorah should walk away with more resistances than Destoroyah. For starters, Destoroyah's greater physical strength can't really be brought to bear early on thanks to Hedorah's toxic density. Once or if it gets dried out, Destoroyah's physical traits can be used, but until then, any tail coil or claw swipe will just result in charred features. Features that won't heal as Destoroyah doesn't possess regeneration. The Oxygen Destroyer Ray will also prove rather poor against damaging Hedorah's flesh. Even Destoroyah's horrifying abilities would more than likely fail to compare to what Hedorah's species survived on his homeworld. While I did speculate about Monster X having some resistance in my past video to the properties of micro-oxygen based on his Hedorah/alien biology, if I were a betting man, which I am and it's a serious problem, I would wager a far stronger effect also applies here, because organisms that don't need oxygen, like Destoroyah's non-mutated Precambrian ancestor, not only survived the Oxygen Destroyer, but thrived. Hedorah doesn't rely on oxygen, therefore the destructive properties of micro-oxygen will prove poor at dissolving its black flesh. Cut through it? Sure, the Visceral Blade will easily cut through Hedorah too, but then Destoroyah has the problem of the Triphibian reforming or splitting into two separate entities. On the flip side, Destoroyah really only has one benefit in this fight, being that he doesn't breathe in an atmosphere, therefore the sulfuric mist that Hedorah produces will not be pushed into his lungs. So for the first round, Hedorah would have the advantage, as Destoroyah dishes out every trick in his arsenal, only to have little effect. Acidic sludge would eventually burn away his hide to a point where he is forced to separate. Unlike in the film, I can't see Destoroyah swarming Hedorah as he did with Meltdown Godzilla. The acidic effects would be too potent for the smaller swarm, and Destoroyah, while no kaiju mastermind like Space Godzilla, would probably know by this part of the fight not to get in close, forcing them to keep a distance and using their Oxygen Destroyer beams from afar. Hedorah, meanwhile, can easily pick off the swarm with its Hedrium Ray, and by now I think the fight would be clear. Destoroyah can't kill Hedorah. If you are a smart viewer, which I know you are, you're probably waiting for me to say how the Oxygen Destroyer Ray, while it won't affect the black flesh of Hedorah, will dehydrate it. Water is composed of oxygen and hydrogen after all. Therefore, if the oxygen is destroyed, then the hydrogen could be burned away, forming, the small fires within Hedorah, or at the very least, it just dehydrates him from the inside, forcing Hedorah to become weaker and weaker and his pollution to become, less dense and less toxic. It's a bit of a weird way to dehydrate the enemy, considering it's really just destroying the water on a molecular level, at least the oxygen molecules within, but that's actually not how the Oxygen Destroyer Ray works. See, the Oxygen Destroyer, as well as the corresponding destructive energy it releases, works in two steps. First, a chemical reaction targets pure oxygen, so any creatures or life form that needs oxygen will suddenly begin to suffocate. The next phase, as the oxygen dissolves, releases that destructive power, liquefying the target. This is what happened to the original Godzilla, but creatures that don't need oxygen don't seem to be affected by said process. If the energy released by the Oxygen Destroyer destroyed all substances in life, then the Precambrian life that turns into Destoroyah, the seafloor, and even the very sea would have been vaporized too. Also keep in mind, all life on Earth has water inside of it. If Hedorah's flesh would be atomized by the Oxygen Destroyer's effects, then so too would the Proto-Destroyahs been destroyed by the water inside of them. Obviously, the Oxygen Destroyer Ray is more inherently destructive than Yamane's Oxygen Destroyer, as seen with the Violet Blast destroying vehicles and easily slicing through metal, so some water will probably be lost. However, it just won't be enough. Consider Hedorah ejected a monstrous pool's worth of toxic sludge without dehydrating. Even with a second, fully healed body, Destoroyah, the death-dealing hive mind, just has no great way to put Hedorah down for good. Even if Hedorah is forced to revert into a smaller flying form, the sulfuric mist and constant attacks will eventually lead to Destoroyah's demise. Hedorah just doesn't have any openings for Destoroyah to take advantage of, so he can gain a path to victory, which is not how I thought this battle was going to go when I was first researching it. I thought that the Oxygen Destroyer Ray was going to vaporize the water inside Hedorah, but the more I did the research, the more this became evident that this is not the case, and kind of backed up my original assumptions on Monster X. So, do you agree with my analysis? Do you think this matchup would be different? I sure thought so. Leave your comments. I'm really interested to see them in the comment section below. If you like this video, please leave a like, maybe subscribe, and until next month's video, I'm GrayShot151 on What If Kaiju, and I'll catch you all next time. Until then, later.